took a deep breath. At 9 years old, she already knew when someone was completely underestimating her. And this time, unlike all the other times she had bowed her head, something inside her whispered that this would be the last time she would allow herself to be treated like trash. "I understand perfectly, sir," she replied with a calmness that made the producer frown, uncomfortable with the unexpected maturity of this dirty barefoot child. 2 hours earlier, Keisha was sleeping under an awning when she was awakened by a group of production assistants looking for interesting characters for the show's special episode. They saw her singing for coins and immediately knew they had found what they were looking for, someone to serve as comic relief on a show that sold dreams to some and humiliation to others. "We'll put you at the end," said the producer, consulting his clipboard. "After all the talented kids have performed, you come on to balance the show." What that arrogant man didn't know was that Keisha had grown up on the streets watching, learning, memorizing every detail of how the world worked. She knew exactly why she was there. She knew what role they expected her to play. But she also knew something they would never discover until it was too late. In the last 3 years living on the streets, since losing the grandmother who raised her, Keisha had developed something no child should have, the ability to see through the masks adults wore. And at that moment, as she watched the fake smiles and condescending looks around her, she made a decision that would change everything. "Can I ask you a question, sir?" she said, tilting her head slightly with calculated innocence. "Make it quick, kid. We have a show to record." "Do you have children?" The question caught the man off guard. "I do. 2 girls." "Why?" Keisha smiled, a small smile, but one that carried something that made the producer's heart race without him knowing exactly why. "Just curious," she replied, carefully storing that information along with all the other things she had observed and mentally noted over the past 2 hours backstage. As she walked toward the stage, carrying the broken guitar as if it were a treasure, Keisha thought about the letter she had hidden in her only possession, a torn backpack. A letter that explained not only who she really was, but also why being on that show was no coincidence. If you're enjoying this story of a girl who everyone underestimated but who holds secrets capable of turning the tables completely, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because what happens when Keisha steps onto that stage will prove that some people are born to rewrite the rules of a world that insists on putting them down. Backstage at American Idol, Keisha watched silently as the other participating children were treated like little celebrities. Assistants ran back and forth offering gourmet snacks, cold water, and even professional makeup services for each of them. "Attention everyone!" shouted producer Richard Brennan, clapping his hands to get their attention. "Remember, you are the future of American music. Today, the whole country will get to know your talents." Meanwhile, Keisha remained seated on the cold floor of the hallway, still holding her broken guitar. When she tried to approach the snack table, a production assistant gently pushed her away. "Sorry, sweetie, but these snacks are only for the official participants," the woman said with a condescending smile. "You must have come to accompany someone, right?" "Actually, I'm also going to perform," Keisha replied calmly. The assistant frowned and consulted her clipboard. "Oh yes, you're the special girl." The way she said special made it clear that it was not a compliment. "Well, anyway, you'll be performing last. Very last." Richard approached the group of talented children, completely ignoring Keisha. "Now listen carefully. You are going to represent the best this country has to offer. Sing with your hearts, show off your perfect techniques, and make your families proud." It was then that one of the participating children, a blonde girl of about 12 named Ashley, noticed Keisha sitting alone. "Dad, why is that girl here?" Ashley asked the well-dressed man beside her. "Don't worry about it, princess," her father replied, lowering his voice. "She's here to, how can I explain it, to show the contrast. So that you can shine even brighter." Keisha heard every word. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a pang of something she hadn't experienced in years, pure, controlled anger. At that moment, her mind flashed back 3 years, to the day she lost her grandmother Dorothy. The only person who believed that a poor black girl could be anything in this world. Dorothy used to say, "Keisha, my granddaughter, when the world tries to diminish you, you grow twice as big. And when they try to silence you, you sing 3 times as loud." Her grandmother had been a gospel singer in a small church in Harlem for over 40 years. She was the one who taught Keisha not only to sing, but to use music as resistance. "Music is our secret weapon, child. They can take our homes, our money, our dignity. but they can never take away what God has put in our voices. After Dorothy died of cancer, because she couldn't afford proper treatment, Keisha ended up living on the streets. But she carried with her something that none of those television producers could have imagined: years of rigorous vocal training and a deep understanding of music that would make any conservatory teacher blush with envy. "Hey girl," Richard called, interrupting her memories. "Do you even know any songs? Because it would be a shame to waste TV time." "I know a few," Keisha replied, strumming her guitar. "A few?" Richard laughed loudly. "What kind of a few? Street music? Rap? Something you learned begging for change?" The other kids laughed along with him. But Keisha just smiled, that same small mysterious smile she had used before. "Can I ask you a question, Mr. Richard?" she said, tilting her head with feigned innocence. "Go ahead." "Did you study music?" Richard looked slightly offended. "Of course I did. I have an MBA in entertainment management from UCLA. "How interesting," Keisha replied, mentally filing away this additional information. "And do you play any instruments?" "I don't need to play to recognize talent when I see it," he retorted, irritated. "I understand perfectly." What Richard didn't know was that, hidden in her torn backpack, Keisha carried a letter from her grandmother Dorothy herself. A letter that explained not only who Keisha really was, but also revealed family connections that would transform that program from a planned humiliation into something completely different. As Richard walked away laughing with the other producers, commenting on how fun it would be to see the little girl try to sing something, Keisha closed her eyes and whispered softly, "Thank you, Grandma. The time has come to use everything you taught me." Each new humiliation only strengthened something inside her that her oppressors couldn't see, a silent strength fueled by the very injustice they tried to impose. What those privileged people didn't know was that every act of contempt was writing their own sentence of defeat, and that behind those seemingly vulnerable eyes, a perfect plan was beginning to take shape. While Richard and the other producers enjoyed planning her public humiliation, Keisha calmly walked to a quiet corner backstage. She opened her torn backpack and carefully removed a yellowed envelope. It was the letter her grandmother Dorothy had left her, with specific instructions: "Only open when you are ready to use everything I taught you, my granddaughter." 3 years living on the streets had been enough for Keisha to understand that she was ready. The letter revealed something that would make anyone in that studio swallow every word of contempt. Dorothy Williams had not been just an ordinary gospel singer. She had been one of the first black women to graduate in music composition from the Juilliard School in the 1960s, when this was practically impossible. More importantly, she had been the personal mentor of James Mitchell, the current CEO of the television network that produced American Idol. "James has always been like a son to me," Dorothy wrote in the letter. "If you ever need help, go to him. But remember, don't ask for charity. Show him what you're capable of first." Keisha put the letter away and smiled. Even after her death, her grandmother was still teaching her strategy. "Hey you, street girl," shouted Ashley, the blonde contestant, approaching with a group of other children. "My dad is curious to know how you got in here. Did you lie on your application?" "I didn't lie about anything," Keisha replied calmly, tuning one of the loose strings on her guitar. "Oh sure," Ashley said dismissively. "So you really think you stand a chance against us? I've been studying at the Manhattan Conservatory for 6 years. I have private teachers who cost more per hour than you probably see in a month." The other kids laughed. But Keisha just kept tuning the instrument, testing each note with a precision that made Ashley frown, annoyed. "Do you even know how to read music?" another girl taunted. "I know a few things," Keisha replied, and for the first time allowed a small smile to appear on her lips. What these privileged children didn't know was that, in addition to her rigorous training with Dorothy, Keisha had spent the last 3 years practicing in places they could never imagine. Subway stations with perfect acoustics, where she learned to master her own voice without a microphone. Urban tunnels where she discovered how to make a broken guitar sound like a Stradivarius. Noisy street corners where she developed the ability to maintain rhythm and pitch even under extreme pressure. Every cold night, every hungry day, every look of contempt on the streets had been, without her knowing it, training for this moment. It was then that she noticed an older man watching discreetly from the other side of the stage. Gray hair, gold-rimmed glasses, elegant but warm posture. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and something in his gaze made Keisha's heart race. The man approached slowly, completely ignoring Ashley and the other girls. "Excuse me," he said, addressing only Keisha. "May I ask your full name?" "Keisha Dorothy Williams," she replied, deliberately emphasizing her middle name. The man stood motionless for a few seconds. His eyes filled with tears, which he tried to hide by adjusting his glasses. "Dorothy Williams was your—" "My grandmother." James Mitchell, the network's executive director, felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. Dorothy had died 3 years ago, and he hadn't even known she had family. The woman who had changed his life, who had taught him that music had no color or social class, who had guided him through difficult times when he was just a young black man trying to survive in the entertainment industry. "Where have you been all these years?" he asked, his voice breaking. "On the streets. Ever since she died." James closed his eyes, feeling the weight of guilt. If he had known, if he had looked for her. "Do you sing like her?" he asked. "She taught me everything I know." "And you came here too?" Keisha glanced toward the stage, where Richard was still laughing with other producers, probably telling someone about the prank they were going to play on her. "To show what I'm capable of," she replied simply. James understood immediately. Dorothy always said that the best revenge against prejudice was excellence that could not be denied. "Can I do you a favor?" he asked discreetly. "Actually," said Keisha, "can I ask you a favor?" "Anything. Don't interfere. Let them do exactly what they plan to do to me." James frowned, confused. "But they're going to try to humiliate you publicly." "I know. And when they try, I want you to record everything. Every second, every reaction, every word they say." The smile that appeared on Keisha's face at that moment was identical to the one Dorothy used to give when she was about to teach someone an unforgettable lesson. "They think they know who I am," she continued, strumming the guitar strings. "But they know nothing about what I carry inside me. About the years of training, about the music that runs through my veins, about the strength my grandmother passed on to me." James nodded, beginning to understand the plan. "And then you do what you think is right with this recording." At that moment, Richard reappeared, interrupting the conversation without even noticing who the man talking to Keisha was. "Hey girl. It's your time to shine," he said with a cruel smile. "We hope you entertain us well out there." Keisha stood up, adjusted the guitar on her back, and walked toward the stage. But before she was out of earshot, she turned to James and whispered, "My grandmother always said that God gives us talents not only to elevate ourselves, but to elevate others who will come after us. Today is not just about me." James watched the girl walk with a dignity that contrasted sharply with her simple clothes and broken guitar. For a moment, it was as if Dorothy were there again, ready to rewrite the rules of a world that insisted on underestimating people like them. While Richard organized the cameras to capture what he believed to be cruel entertainment at the expense of a vulnerable child, James discreetly instructed his own film crew to record absolutely everything. Every word, every reaction, every second of what was about to happen. Because something told him that this would not be an ordinary humiliation. It would be the moment when a little street performer would teach an entire country that true talent does not choose cradle, color, or social class to be born into, and that underestimating people like Keisha Williams is always a mistake that comes at a high price. The stage lights came on full blast as Keisha stepped into the center of America's stars. The audience of over 500 people murmured quietly, some discreetly taking photos of the street girl holding a broken guitar. Richard, backstage, whispered to his assistants, "Remember, when she starts singing, activate the faulty sound system. I want that horrible hissing sound coming out of the speakers. It'll be hilarious." Ashley and the other participating children watched from backstage, eager to witness what they believed would be the inevitable humiliation of someone who didn't belong there. "Hello," Keisha said into the microphone, her clear voice echoing through the auditorium. "My name is Keisha Dorothy Williams. I'm 9 years old, and I want to dedicate this song to my grandmother, who taught me that music has no color or social class." Richard frowned when he heard the full name. Something about that Dorothy sounded familiar, but he quickly dismissed the thought. Keisha adjusted her guitar and played the first chords. The sound, even coming from a damaged instrument, was pure and in tune with a precision that made some professional musicians in the audience sit up straight in their chairs. That's when Richard signaled to his assistants. The sound system began to produce a deafening hiss, completely interfering with the music. The audience covered their ears, annoyed. Some people started to laugh, thinking it was the girl's fault. "Technical problems," Richard shouted from the side of the stage, feigning concern. "What a shame, but we'll have to end it here." But Keisha didn't stop. She stepped away from the microphone, positioned herself in the center of the stage, and began to sing without amplification. Her voice, trained by years of performing in noisy subway stations, cut through the air like a sharp blade. The static continued, but Keisha's voice was so powerful that it echoed throughout the auditorium, reaching even the back rows. One by one, people began to fall silent, mesmerized. She sang Amazing Grace in a version that blended traditional gospel with classical techniques that only someone trained by a master would recognize. Every note was perfect, every phrase charged with an emotion that brought tears to the eyes of the audience. Richard, desperate, shouted to his assistants, "Turn everything off. Cut the broadcast." But it was too late. James Mitchell had already instructed his team to keep the cameras rolling, broadcasting everything live to millions of American homes. When Keisha finished, there was 3 long seconds of silence before the audience erupted in deafening applause. The audience rose to their feet, shouting, crying, cheering. Even Ashley and the other children backstage were speechless. That's when James Mitchell took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, taking the microphone, "my name is James Mitchell, Executive Director of this television network. And I need to tell you who this extraordinary girl really is." Richard turned completely pale. He didn't know the executive director was there. Keisha Dorothy Williams is the granddaughter of Dorothy Williams, one of the greatest gospel singers and songwriters in this country. A woman who graduated from Juilliard in the 1960s, when that was almost impossible for a black woman. A woman who was my personal mentor for over 20 years. The audience gasped collectively. "Dorothy died 3 years ago, and I didn't even know she had a granddaughter living on the streets," James continued, his voice breaking. "Meanwhile, the producers of this show brought this child here not to celebrate her talent, but to publicly humiliate her." Richard tried to hide behind the scenes, but James continued. "It was all filmed. Every cruel comment, every attempt at sabotage, every moment they tried to turn this child into entertainment at the expense of her dignity." The cameras found Richard, who was now visibly sweating as he tried to escape. "Richard Brennan," James said, pointing directly at him, "you're fired. Not just from this show, but from this network. And I'm sure no other reputable broadcaster will hire someone who thinks it's fun to humiliate children on national television." The audience began to boo Richard fiercely. He tried to shout something in his defense, but his voice was completely drowned out by the cries of outrage. "As for you," James turned to Ashley and the other children backstage, "I hope you've learned a valuable lesson about judging people by their appearance." Ashley, completely ashamed, lowered her head. Several other children began to cry, realizing the magnitude of their cruelty. James then knelt down beside Keisha, who remained calm in the center of the storm. "Keisha, on behalf of this entire company, I apologize," he said. "Your grandmother would be incredibly proud of you. Not just for your talent, but for the dignity with which you faced all of this." "She always told me that music is our secret weapon," Keisha replied simply. "And that the best remedy for prejudice is excellence that cannot be denied." The phrase echoed through the auditorium, captured by cameras and broadcast to millions of people. At that moment, Richard was escorted out of the building by security guards, while the audience continued to applaud. His 20-year career in television had ended in a matter of minutes, destroyed by his own arrogance and cruelty. As the program's credits rolled with Keisha being embraced by James on stage, a powerful truth reverberated across the country. Underestimating someone based on their background is always a costly mistake, and that true talent does not choose the cradle in which it is born. It just waits for the right opportunity to shine and rewrite all the rules of a world that insists on putting people in boxes too small to contain their greatness. The days following the broadcast of American Idol became a whirlwind that no one could have predicted. The video of Keisha singing Amazing Grace while facing technical sabotage went viral in less than 24 hours, reaching over 50 million views and becoming the most shared television moment of the year. James Mitchell kept his word in an even more impactful way than he had promised. The next morning, he called a national press conference where he showed all the behind-the-scenes footage, every cruel comment from Richard, every mean laugh from the other children, every moment they tried to turn Keisha into entertainment at the expense of her dignity. "This television network failed an exceptional child," James said in front of dozens of cameras. "And we will not allow this to happen again." The public reaction was overwhelming. Richard Brennan not only lost his job, his entire career collapsed in a matter of hours. No broadcaster, production company, or entertainment company across the country wanted to associate its name with a man who had tried to humiliate an orphan child on national television. His social media accounts were flooded with over 2 million messages of condemnation, forcing him to leave Los Angeles and move to a small town where no one knew him. Ashley and the other participating children faced their own consequences. Ashley's parents, mortified by the national exposure of their daughter's cruel behavior, immediately withdrew her from the Manhattan Conservatory and enrolled her in a regular public school, where she had to learn to get along with children from all social backgrounds. "We want our daughter to learn the value of humility," Ashley's father said in a later interview, clearly trying to salvage the family's reputation. But the most extraordinary thing was what happened to Keisha herself. James Mitchell didn't just apologize. He turned the whole situation into an opportunity for real change. He immediately created the Dorothy Williams program, named after Keisha's grandmother, offering full music scholarships to talented children from underprivileged communities. Keisha became the program's first beneficiary, receiving not only a full scholarship to study at the prestigious Los Angeles Music Academy, but also a home. James and his wife, Margaret, who had never been able to have children, formally asked to adopt her. "Dorothy always said that music connects us as a family," James explained on the day of the official adoption. "Keisha is not just a talented child we are helping. She has brought back something we lost when Dorothy left us." 6 months after the broadcast, Keisha performed at Carnegie Hall as a guest soloist with the New York Philharmonic Orchestra. The concert, broadcast live across the country, raised over $5 million for the Dorothy Williams program, which had already benefited more than 200 children in similar situations. During her performance at Carnegie Hall, Keisha dedicated the music to the memory of her grandmother Dorothy, but also to all children who are judged by the color of their skin, their background, or the clothes they wear, before anyone bothers to get to know the talent they carry within themselves. The audience wept openly when she mentioned that she had spent 3 years sleeping on the streets of Los Angeles, just a few miles from the theater where she was now receiving a standing ovation. The Stars of America program was completely revamped. James implemented new protocols that included child psychologists, social workers, and a strict zero-tolerance policy against any form of discrimination or humiliation of participants. "Talent does not choose its birthplace, color, or social class," became the show's new slogan, emblazoned in gold letters on the stage where Keisha had been humiliated and then triumphed. Richard, for his part, tried several times to rehabilitate himself publicly, giving interviews in which he claimed to have learned from his mistakes. But each attempt only reignited public outrage. He ended up working as a used car salesman in a small town, bitterly discovering that a lost reputation is one of the hardest things to recover. 2 years after the episode, Keisha, now 11, released her first album, Voices from the Street, where she performed classic songs adapted with gospel influences she had learned from Dorothy. The album debuted at #1 on the music charts and earned her a Grammy nomination for Best Classical Vocal Album. At the Grammy ceremony, Keisha wore a simple but elegant dress and carried the same broken guitar she had brought to the show 2 years earlier, now restored and tuned, but retaining the marks of time as a reminder of her journey. "This guitar taught me that our true strength comes not from what we have, but from what we do with what we have," she said as she accepted the award. "And that sometimes we need to be at our lowest point to discover how high we can fly." Ashley, who had watched the ceremony from home, sent Keisha a handwritten letter a few days later, sincerely apologizing for her cruel behavior and revealing that the experience had completely changed her perspective on privilege and humility. "You taught me that true talent has nothing to do with the opportunities we are born with, but with the courage to keep singing even when they try to silence us," Ashley wrote. Keisha responded to the letter, and the two eventually became friends, proving that even the deepest wounds can be turned into bridges when there is sincerity on both sides. James Mitchell often reflected on how a moment of injustice had become the catalyst for such profound change. "Dorothy always said that God uses unexpected people to teach lessons the world needs to learn," he commented in an interview. "Keisha wasn't just a child we found, she was the teacher we needed." Keisha Williams' story became much more than a case of individual triumph. She rewrote the rules about how talent is recognized and celebrated in America, proving that true excellence knows no color, social class, or origin. Today, at age 13, Keisha divides her time between advanced music studies, charity performances, and artistic direction of the Dorothy Williams program, which has benefited more than 1,000 children across the country. She has never forgotten her origins, regularly visiting shelters and underserved communities to identify new talent and offer opportunities. My grandmother always told me that our gifts are not just to elevate ourselves, but to build bridges so that others can rise as well, she often repeats to children she meets in situations similar to the one she experienced. The lesson that resonates to this day is simple but powerful. Underestimating someone based on their appearance, origin, or current situation is always a mistake that comes at a high price. Because true talent doesn't ask permission to shine. It just waits for the right opportunity to rewrite all the rules of a world that insists on putting extraordinary people in boxes too small to contain their greatness. And Richard Brennan? He discovered in the worst possible way that trying to diminish someone else to feel greater is always a strategy that ends up diminishing only those who practice it. If this story of a girl who turned humiliation into triumph and prejudice into opportunity touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because stories like Keisha's remind us that true victory is not in defeating our enemies, but in becoming so extraordinary that they become irrelevant.